An elderly man walks into a police station and faces injustice, forcibly having his head shaved and enduring humiliation. He remains silent, letting them laugh. But when federal investigators arrive, revealing his true identity, the entire station freezes. A storm of justice is coming. It was just after 8 a.m. when Michael Wilson stepped through the glass doors of the Riverdale police station. The morning sun highlighted his hunched shoulders and weathered face as he carefully navigated the worn steps, one hand gripping a simple wooden cane. At 70, Wilson moved with the deliberate patience of someone who'd earned every creak in his joints. His white hair, thick despite his age, was neatly combed back. He wore a faded plaid shirt, khaki pants that had seen better days, and scuffed work boots. Nothing about him demanded attention, yet his eyes, sharp blue beneath bushy brows, missed nothing. The station was busy with the usual morning chaos. Officer Reynolds at the front desk barely glanced up as Wilson approached. "Help you, old-timer?" Reynolds asked, not bothering to hide his impatience. "I'm here about the Miller property dispute," Wilson replied, voice steady despite his frail appearance. "Sheriff Davis requested I come in." Reynolds snorted. "Right. The trespassing call." His tone made clear what he thought of the complaint. When Sheriff Scott Davis emerged from his office, his imposing figure commanded immediate attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a carefully trimmed mustache and gleaming badge, he embodied authority in this small town. "So you're the one causing trouble at the old Miller place?" Davis looked Wilson up and down dismissively. "Don't look like much of a troublemaker." Wilson met his gaze. "No trouble, Sheriff. Just a misunderstanding." Davis's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. Come with me." Wilson followed slowly, aware of the stares following him. He'd faced worse scrutiny in his life, though not recently. Not since he'd hung up his uniform and medals years ago. The interrogation room was sparse. A metal table, 3 chairs, and walls that had witnessed countless confessions. Wilson sat quietly as Davis circled him like a predator. "You know, we've had reports of someone suspicious at the Miller property. Someone who doesn't belong." Davis placed both hands on the table, leaning into Wilson's space. Someone who might be connected to some missing federal equipment. Wilson remained composed. "I'm just a visitor in town." No ID, refusing to give a full statement. Davis straightened up. "Makes me wonder what you're hiding under that mop of hair. Maybe you're not the harmless old man you're pretending to be." The door opened. 2 officers entered, one carrying a pair of electric clippers. "What are you doing?" Wilson asked, his voice betraying the first hint of concern. "Standard procedure for uncooperative suspects." Davis replied with a cold smile. "We need to check for identifying marks. Tattoos, scars. You understand." Wilson's hands tightened slightly on his cane. "I don't consent to this." "Didn't ask for consent." Davis nodded to the officers. "Hold him." They grabbed Wilson's arms with unnecessary force. The old man didn't resist, but his eyes hardened with quiet dignity. The clippers buzzed to life, their mechanical hum filling the small room. "Please," Wilson said quietly. "This isn't necessary." Davis ignored him. The clippers touched Wilson's scalp, and thick white strands fell to the floor. The officers snickered as they continued, methodically removing every bit of hair, revealing old scars that Wilson had kept hidden for decades. "Look at that," one officer whispered. "Old man's got quite the collection of battle marks." Wilson remained silent, eyes fixed straight ahead as they stripped him of his dignity. He could have stopped them. Even at 70, he knew exactly how to disarm 3 men in this small space. But that wasn't why he was here. So he endured their laughter, their cutting remarks about crazy old vets, and the cold air on his newly exposed scalp. After they'd finished their humiliation, Davis had Wilson escorted to a holding cell. "Cool off there while we run your prints," he said dismissively. "Maybe it'll help your memory about what you were really doing at the Miller place." Wilson sat alone on the metal bench, hands folded over his cane, back still hunched. He touched his bare scalp once, briefly, then resumed his patient waiting. Outside, he could hear the normal operations of the station. Phones ringing, officers chatting, the coffee machine gurgling. Until suddenly, everything changed. The front doors swung open with authority. Voices rose in the main office area. Calm but commanding tones that immediately silenced the casual chatter. "This is Special Agent Catherine Holt, FBI." A woman's voice announced. "Where's Sheriff Davis?" Wilson couldn't see what was happening, but he could picture the scene perfectly. The stunned faces, the scrambling to attention. He heard Davis's voice, suddenly professional, introducing himself. Then a deeper voice spoke. "General James Blackwood, Department of Defense. We're here about Michael Wilson." A moment of confused silence. "The old man? He's just a vagrant we picked up for trespassing. Maybe involved in some petty theft. Take us to him. Now." Footsteps approached the holding area. The cell door opened, revealing a collection of figures that caused every officer present to stand straighter. 2 FBI agents in suits, a full-bird colonel in dress uniform, a civilian whose government credentials made Davis's face drain of color. General Blackwood stepped forward, scanning the room until his eyes fell on Wilson. For a moment, the general's professional demeanor cracked. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, taking in Wilson's shaved head and the visible scars. "What have they done to you, Commander?" Wilson finally straightened up, his hunched posture falling away as he rose to his full height. Despite his age, he now stood with unmistakable military bearing. "Commander Wilson, sir," Blackwood continued, stepping closer. "I apologize for this situation." Davis looked between them, confusion turning to unease. "Commander?" "This old man." Agent Holt turned to Davis, her expression frigid. "That's Commander Michael Wilson, Navy SEAL, retired. Holder of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Medal of Honor. One of the most decorated Special Operations officers in United States military history." The color drained from Davis's face. There must be some mistake. He had no identification, wouldn't answer questions. "Because he's here on classified business," the civilian said sharply. "As we informed your department 3 days ago." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. Officers who had been smirking minutes before now stood rigid, eyes wide with horrified realization. Wilson finally spoke, his voice different now. Deeper, clearer, carrying the unmistakable command presence that decades of military service had ingrained. "The Miller property is being used for a sensitive operation monitoring potential domestic terrorism activity. I was posing as a vagrant to maintain surveillance." He touched his shaved head, the scars now visible to everyone. "These are souvenirs from Kandahar, Mogadishu, and a classified operation in North Korea. I've survived worse than a haircut, gentlemen." General Blackwood turned to Davis. "Sheriff, I need your office. Now." As Davis led them away, Wilson remained standing in the cell, no longer the frail old man who had entered the station hours earlier. Officers avoided his gaze as one young deputy quietly approached. "Sir," he said, voice barely audible, "I want to apologize. I should have said something." Wilson regarded him steadily. "It's not about what you should have done, son. It's about what you'll do next time." The deputy nodded, shame evident in his eyes. "Yes, sir." Within an hour, the Riverdale police station had transformed. FBI agents conducted interviews while DOD officials secured files and evidence. In the conference room, Wilson sat with perfect posture as General Blackwood briefed him on the operation status. "Your cover wasn't compromised, at least not regarding the target," Blackwood assured him. "But this local situation," he shook his head, "inexcusable." A knock interrupted them. Agent Holt entered with a middle-aged woman in tow. "Commander Wilson, this is Rebecca Torres, former administrative assistant here. She's been waiting to speak with you specifically." The woman stepped forward nervously. "I worked here for 15 years, sir. I left 6 months ago because I couldn't stand it anymore." She placed a thick folder on the table. "These are copies of complaints against Sheriff Davis and his deputies, specifically regarding treatment of military personnel and veterans." Wilson opened the folder. Inside were dozens of statements. Veterans pulled over without cause, harassed at local establishments, detained on flimsy pretexts. All filed, all dismissed. "Davis has a thing about military folks," Rebecca explained. His father was a decorated Marine, but Davis failed a physical when he tried to enlist. He's been making veterans pay for it ever since. As Wilson read the statements, his expression remained composed, but his eyes grew harder with each page. "It's not just here," Agent Holt added. "We've uncovered similar patterns in 3 other counties." It seems Davis was part of an unofficial network of law enforcement officers who shared this prejudice. The complaints went up the chain, Rebecca continued. County commissioners, state oversight boards. Nothing happened. Wilson closed a folder. Because they protected their own. Blackwood nodded grimly, just like we protect ours. By afternoon, the station filled with new faces, veterans from around the county, some walking with canes, others in wheelchairs, many bearing the invisible scars of service. They came forward one by one, telling stories of harassment, dismissal, and systemic bias. With each testimony, Wilson's resolve hardened. This was no longer just about mission or personal dignity. This was about every man and woman who had served, only to come home and face the disrespect of those who should have protected them. That evening, Wilson stood alone in his temporary quarters at the local motel. The room was silent except for the distant hum of highway traffic. He studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror, running a hand over his shaved head, tracing the scars that told stories few civilians could comprehend. At 70, his body carried a map of his service. The jagged line from Beirut, the puckered divot from Bosnia, the burn patterns from that classified extraction in '89. Scars he had kept hidden, not from shame, but from the questions they invited. Wilson straightened his shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling back into place. He had accepted this mission because it needed doing, and because despite his age, he was still the best person for it. But now, he had stumbled into another battle entirely. He thought of the young men and women he had commanded, the ones who had returned to civilian life expecting respect, or at least decency. Instead, they had found prejudice dressed as authority. "Not on my watch," he murmured to his reflection. "Not anymore." He'd been silent too long. They all had. The code of quiet professionalism that defined special operators had its place, but so did justice. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the silence would end. Within a week, Riverdale transformed. News vans lined the main street. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, and social media exploded with the story of the decorated commander humiliated by small-town police, and the subsequent investigation revealing years of systemic discrimination against veterans. Sheriff Davis was suspended pending criminal charges for civil rights violations. Half his force faced disciplinary hearings. The county commissioners, suddenly eager to distance themselves, pledged full cooperation with federal investigators. Wilson, however, focused on something more lasting than punishment. In a community center, surrounded by military officials, law enforcement representatives, and veterans advocates, he unveiled what would become known as the Wilson Protocol. "This isn't about retribution," he explained, standing tall despite his years. "It's about recognition and respect. About ensuring that those who serve their country aren't then mistreated by the very institutions they fought to protect." The protocol was comprehensive, mandatory training for law enforcement on veteran issues, including PTSD recognition, independent review boards with veteran representatives to evaluate complaints, liaison officers from veterans organizations embedded with police departments. "When someone puts on a uniform to serve this country," Wilson continued, "they don't stop deserving respect when they take it off." Not everyone embraced the changes. Some officials complained about federal overreach, about complicated new procedures, about the cost of implementation, until Wilson invited them to a special session at the VA hospital. There, in a room filled with wounded warriors, he didn't speak at all. He simply let them tell their stories of service, of sacrifice, and of returning home to face not gratitude but suspicion and harassment. By the session's end, even the most resistant officials signed on to the protocol. Senator Eleanor Hayes, head of the Veterans Affairs Committee, publicly announced her support. "Commander Wilson has shown us that true strength isn't about wielding power," she stated. "It's about using influence to lift others up even when you've been knocked down." Within months, police departments across 3 states had adopted the Wilson Protocol. National law enforcement organizations were beginning to take notice. 6 months later, Michael Wilson stood on the steps of the renovated Riverdale police station. His hair had grown back, though he now kept it shorter, no longer hiding his scars. Beside him stood the new sheriff, Jamie Cortez, a former Army Ranger who had been one of the first to come forward with his story of mistreatment. The ceremony was simple, a plaque dedicating the station's new Veterans Liaison Office. No grand speeches, no political posturing, just a quiet acknowledgement of change. "Commander," Sheriff Cortez said afterward, "the Wilson Protocol has transformed how we operate. Last month, we had 3 encounters with veterans in crisis that, honestly, would have ended badly before. Instead, we got them help." Wilson nodded, satisfied. That's the goal, one department at a time. Across the country, the impact spread. Police academies incorporated veteran sensitivity training into their curricula. VA hospitals established direct lines to local law enforcement. The Justice Department created a special task force to address discrimination against military personnel. There were still challenges, still resistance. Change never came easily, but momentum was building. Wilson declined most interview requests and refused consideration for civilian awards. He simply returned to his modest home in Virginia, where he mentored young veterans transitioning to civilian life. One afternoon, a package arrived from Riverdale, a scrapbook containing letters from veterans sharing how the Wilson Protocol had changed their interactions with authorities. The final page held a photograph of the new graduating class from the State Police Academy, standing at attention, while a veteran officer taught them about respecting those who had served. Wilson placed the book on his shelf beside his military commendations. In some ways, it meant more than all of them combined, not because it bore his name, but because it represented what he had always fought for, not recognition, but respect, not for himself, but for all who served. Have you or someone you know experienced similar treatment? We believe every veteran deserves respect for their service and sacrifice. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and help us spread awareness about the importance of treating our military heroes with dignity. Subscribe for more stories that honor those who served. Your respect in the comments matters to our veterans.